is pretty much all of my truck guns, quote unquote, right? Like, I know there's a bunch of like controversy about people talking about truck guns or whatever. But yeah, you should definitely have access to something with a little more firepower to it than your sidearm from time to time. So, I mean, the sidearm is your primary engagement tool, usually for most applications, but and probably going to be your only one. But you know, having something with a little more firepower is a habit I'm in, and definitely one that I think a lot of people should be in. But this is a Palmetto State Armory Saber. Yet again, you know, I'm a big fan of PSA. The Saber line in particular, I think is a hell of a lot of bang for the buck. This one has got the Hodge Defense rail on it, so it's a little bit heavier. This is kind of, the weight on this rail is kind of reminiscent of like the Geisley Stop Mod rail.
Yeah.
I got a rifle with one of those. So, I mean, it is a little heavier. Trade-off there is you're definitely not getting any movement out of it. So, like, you don't have to worry about that. But anyway, you got the Maxim Defense PDW stock on there. I've been fascinated with these. I think, you know, kind of the MP5 style collapsible stock. It's comfortable. I should say arm brace, quote unquote, right? Because this is an arm brace, it's a pistol. But, you know, it's got the upcoming Kyber Optics MDO on top, the mini dot optic.
So what are the specs on that going to be?
So this is selectable, one of 3 reticles that's in it. It's got a dot, a circle with a dot in it, or the large diameter circle inside of it. A lot of people like that. They favor that. You could use this on a handgun as well as mounting it on the rail with a rail mount. There's 3 different mounting options for this as well. So if you want a closed emitter, mini dot style optic, you know, this is another option. Why am I running it on this weapon like this? And you'll notice that these days I kind of do that on most things. One is weight savings. You know, having a lighter weight weapon is always going to be to your advantage, unless your role is DMR or some type of Overwatch or something. Where we are with the technology on battery life and durability of the optics, light years better than what it was 20 years ago. So I don't really see any reason not to run something like this. The other thing is running it in conjunction with a clip-on thermal. I can mount that in front of this optic, and I have a very lightweight, quick setup. So, you know, this is very much a bump in the night type of weapon. When this is not the one that I keep in my vehicle. This is one that I have in the house, but I have been hunting with this a few times, so it's kind of set up for that. Again, revisiting, like in the last video we did, the designated IRV right here. Great laser. The designated IRV differs from designated IR because it has a visible laser, IR laser. They are paired together so that you can, when you zero the visible laser and you're zeroing the IR laser when you're doing that. But it's also got the IR illuminator. This is the best IR illuminator, short of the B.E. Myers Mall. That one is the best that's on the market. But this one is $1,700 less than the B.E. Myers Mall. And it's pretty friendly if you're left-handed, right-handed, for ambidextrous movement. The B.E. Myers Mall really isn't. So, you know, there's that. But other than that, Huxworks can, the 5.56K can. Huxworks gets a big thumbs up in my book. You know, I know there's some videos out there, people saying they spark or whatever. I haven't seen that, and I got a lot of rounds down through. I have 3 of these cans. I've got a lot of rounds through them at night. I haven't seen it. The people that I shoot with haven't seen it. So we're going to be doing a video on that too soon, really soon, and just demonstrating that. But yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, I hear they only really spark when you run, the wrong caliber through them. It's a small issue with the design. You don't run 300 blackout through a 5.56 can, but neither here nor there. Do you prefer? You said the DMR roll. If you want to set one up in a DMR roll, would you use something? What would you say for magnification? So, would you use a 4-fix? Would you use a LPVO? What's your preference?
That really depends. It depends on what your average engagement roll range is. So, here on the East Coast, here in North Carolina, your average engagement distance is, we'll say, between 200 and 300 yards, right?
Yep.
Like, at most. So, our engagement range is quite a bit shorter than, say, like out in Utah or Wyoming or Montana or any of those areas out there where it's much longer, significantly longer range game out there. I would say these days you really can't go wrong with a MPVO, medium power variable optic. Which are increasingly becoming more popular in the market. I think that a 3 to 18 by 50, something in that range, is very, very good. And I know like a lot of people out there are going to be screaming about an LPVO. LPVOs are awesome for a lot of things, but anybody that's ever had a lot of time behind the glass on an LPVO knows that you also give up some stuff too. One is eye relief. You've got a real tight eye box on an LPVO. Typically, a 30 millimeter LPVO is gonna, in conjunction with being kind of tight on the glass. Your head's got to be just right to get a good sight picture. But also, they're going to be kind of dim in the higher magnification ranges because that's just one of the things about having a 30 millimeter tube and such a small objective lens, like your 24 millimeter objective lens. Not saying anything bad, just saying that there's a drawback to everything, and that's what, kind of what you're dealing with there. Some of the new 34 millimeter LPVOs alleviate quite a bit of that. The one that, we have Kyber Optics coming out soon. That one's going to alleviate quite a bit of that, being a 1 to 10. So I kind of throw that in the MPVO realm as kind of a crossover into that, because you're definitely, once you're getting up to 10 power, like you're in that medium power range. One thing to keep in mind with magnification ranges is you don't want to have too much glass for your weapon, because what ends up happening, and we go real deep into that with like first focal plane and all that. But what ends up happening with your glass is that you end up losing your target. If you zoom all the way in, and let's say you're in an active engagement that's got some extended range to it. I'm engaging my target, and people aren't static pieces of steel on the range. Like, they're going to get up, they're going to move, they're do all the things. They disappear. If I'm zoomed all the way in, and I'm running some of these ungodly high magnification range optics, which are excellent, man. I think it's so cool that we're able to do that. But in a practical sense, if you zoom all the way in on a target and you fire a shot and you're not immediately, backing it back out, then, your follow through isn't necessarily there. Right. Your target ends up moving, or whatever. That leads to having there's some pause, right? There's a moment in time that you're trying to reacquire your target in your class. So that's something to think about. And again, on an AR-15, are you going to be taking a shot that far, like really in the real world are you going to be taking a shot that doggone far in a active threat situation? I just don't see it.
No.
Even in Afghanistan, it didn't, like, I think the furthest shot anybody took with an M4 back then maybe was like just over 500 meters ish. I mean, it just, back in those days when we were engaging things at a much further distance, right? There's other weapons platforms for that.
Yep.
You know, the M24, like what I was running back then, of course, you know, the M2010 nowadays. But, you know, dating myself a little bit by saying M24, but that's what we were using. And, you know, the 107, you know, and you're engaging with those platforms rather than M4. So, doesn't mean don't run a high magnification optic on there. Some of the guys like talking about their, you know, their recce rifle build and all that stuff. Like, hey, that's cool. Some of that stuff's pretty awesome, but it's cool with what we're able to do now with all that. But just keep in mind, like, there's a trade-off with everything.
And the practicality kind of you know, 25x on an AR style rifle. I mean, you can zoom in that far, but like you were saying, you're looking through a pinhole in a combat environment. You know, that's all you see. And if you run the first shot and you miss, and you have to take, you know, 5-10 seconds to reacquire, you could be doing a better job with lower magnification and just, I mean, continuing to send accurate shots down the range.
Yeah. So accuracy. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people, I would say this is kind of endemic in newer shooters. Guys who are new to, let's say, the long range game, like whatever it is, whether it's like F-class shoots or, you know, some of the DMR competitions that are out there, which I think is awesome. Like, dude, that's so cool. We live in, you know, in 2025, we have, like, that's such a growing, booming era or like area of the whole, like, shooting community. That's so awesome. But, you know, it's just like with IDPA or IPSC, 3-gun match stuff, like any other competition, there becomes a threshold there of where you're, like, equipping yourself for competition for specific events, or whether you're equipping yourself for a practical scenario.
Yeah.
And there's that Venn diagram, like there's definitely crossover between the two. Not denigrating one or the other, just saying that, you know, the reality of some of the stuff that I see from the PRS world is not necessarily how it goes down in real life. So, you know, you don't always have time to pull out your Kestrel and, you know, get your tripod all set up and, like, you know, it's
perfect world in a perfect environment, you'll get the perfect shot.
Yeah. But talking accuracy, one of the things that guys that are new to all this stuff tend to believe is that accuracy comes from high magnification, and that's just not the case. Like, that's not the case. They think you know, you have to be able to zoom in and see, like, every little detail of your target and everything. That doesn't make you, like, having a high magnification range doesn't make you more capable shooter. In fact, it can in some ways become a detriment. I'll explain why. So, your eyes. The way that our eyes work, we have the fovea centralis, which is the center of our iris, basically. It's, you know, the center of what we're able to see. Well, if I have some aberration in my eyes, which we all do, right? We all do. Doesn't matter how good your vision is. Like, one point in time, my eyesight was like 20/15 in both eyes. It's still not bad, but, you know, definitely age is catching up a little bit there, as it's going to do with everybody. But the thing is like, you know, I have an astigmatism in both eyes, which doesn't really bother me that much, but it's definitely there. And, like, it's getting worse as I get older. It's getting worse. So, you know, our fovea centralis has little aberrations in them. The higher in magnification we go in a scope, it actually exacerbates the problems we have with our eyes. So, you know, if your vision is already not necessarily corrected, but you have some issues, having very high magnification glass is not going to help you. How do you know this? Go to the range and just get behind the scope for a little while, and you're going to see eye fatigue. Like, you're going to get eye fatigue. It's going to happen because the muscles of your iris and your pupil, they're going to get tired. Like, they're going to get worn out. So that's something to keep in mind. Having higher magnification doesn't make you a better shooter by any means. What you want with higher magnification is positive identification.
Yep.
So, like, being able to see more details about your target rather than just making you a better shooter.
Yep. So, talking about accurizing, obviously, the optic helps you identify. What can we do to the stock standard AR-15 platform to make it the most accurate weapon we have?
All right. So first things first, if you've got a crappy barrel, you forget it. Like, there is no tip, trick, thing you can do to make a shitty barrel a good barrel. Like, you can't. It's just like with a race car. Like if you're drag racing or street racing or whatever, and you put shitty tires on your car, you forget it. Like, doesn't matter. You might have the most, hottest car that's ever been built, man. But don't matter. Like, the tires do make a difference. Barrel's the same way. I mean, if your barrel is not true, what we should do is have some of our barrel manufacturing friends come on eventually and talk about this. But it basically, if you're running a cheap, blue light special barrel on your weapon, now I will say this. Where we are today with barrel manufacturing, with CNC machines and where we are, it's a much better place now than it was 20 years ago, where most of your barrels were made by hand. At least some part of the process of making them was made by hand. And so it leads to errors. Yep. But the barrel. So pay attention to the barrel. Make sure you have a decent barrel. There are a lot of good barrel manufacturers out there. I would say, my friends over at Bartline is the best in the world, in my opinion. Mike Rock with Rockcrete, another real good one, kind of dating myself with that, going back to the M24 days. But Mike Rock's another one. And there's several companies out there. I mean, Ballistic Advantage turning out really good barrels. There are good deals to be had in the barrel world, but that's what you got to have. The next thing you have to do with an AR to make sure that you're getting the most consistency out of it, because consistency equates to accuracy. If you yourself and the utilization of your weapon are not consistent, this is why I hammer on in class, we really hammer on trigger reset. Because if you're not resetting that trigger, your follow through is not right, then you're inconsistent yourself. And pretty much proves to every student that hey, that consistency is there. You're becoming more accurate. But your barrel nut, the barrel nut needs to be torqued to 60 pounds. If it's not torqued to 60 pounds, you're going to have issues with it. Your headspace is going to become ever so slightly off. If it is over torqued, and there are a couple of companies here, some pretty well-known companies, I'm going to refrain from mentioning them, that are notorious for over torquing barrels. You're going to know that because you're going to have feeding issues, big feeding issues. Like, every third round is either failing to feed completely or failing to extract. You're going to be able to see that. You can diagnose those problems yourself.
And you've seen these in class as well, right?
Oh yeah. Goodness gracious, yeah. You get to a point to where all your malfunctions you're going to see in an AR, you can pretty much diagnose what the causal factor is with enough rounds downrange. You can begin to see that. Case in point, last fighting carbine course, I noticed that one of the students' bolt was starting to run slower. As he was going through one of the drills, I was watching his bolt on the 9-hole barricade. I'm watching his bolt slow down, and I knew, hey, he's getting ready to have a malfunction. What it was his gas rings on the bolt were not, they basically, your gas rings are on the bolt. You have 3 of them. You can kind of slide them around. You need to pay attention to that every time you're cleaning it, because they do have a lifespan on them. Because they're just little washers, is what they are. But they're compression rings, like an engine. You got an engine piston, you got compression rings. It's the same thing. And if that tiny gap that's on them is in a line, you're going to run into some feeding problems eventually. And he had a high round count in this weapon anyway. I think he was over 10,000 rounds on it, if I remember right. And hadn't changed the bolt, hadn't really changed any component of it, hadn't paid attention to that stuff. And yeah, I mean, compression rings are going to wear out after a while. It's as simple as just get a different bolt. Not the whole bolt carrier group, but just get a different bolt. But talking about over tightening the barrel nut, you want it torqued right at 60 pounds. Any competent gunsmith knows this. They do that. You want to make sure of that. Get a headspace gauge. Make sure your weapon is headspaced properly. If it's improperly headspaced, you may not ever notice it. All right. In fact, I'd say there's a good likelihood on a 5.56 that you'll probably never notice that your headspace is improper. But you won't get the same degree of accuracy because your bullet, right, your round, as it's fed into the chamber, is supposed to be seated at a specific depth. Now, it's still going to fire when it's in there. What you're trying to do is your chamber is spaced just enough for your round to get in there, and no further. Right? You don't want it out here because you can have a out of chamber detonation. You don't want it too tight because then it's not going to feed properly. That's the throat on your chamber is what it's referred to. You need to be checking that with a bore light. I would say, depending on ammo, you need to check that every 500 rounds or so. Just take a bore light, look around in there, see what you got going on. And having a better barrel is definitely going to help you out a whole lot. But those are really the 2 keys to accuracy right there. Headspace, make sure it's headspace, make sure that the barrel is torqued properly, make sure you've got a decent barrel. Don't be getting that, $29 blue light special from, Model 1 sales or whoever, or the Poverty Pony. Don't be doing that. And don't do that and expect that you're going to get any sort of desirable results. I mean, and I'm sure somebody's going to comment and they're going to be like, oh, but my Poverty Pony gets 1 MOA with them. Dude, okay, good for you, man. You're the one guy.
Congratulations. You've done it.
Congratulations, Charlie. You won. You won, Charlie. You won. You won the lottery. I ain't staking my life to that.
No.
But,
What about for rails?
Rails, a lot of different rails on the market. I remember back when, the first time I ever saw a free float tube was Jerry Barnhart running one. And it was like, what is that thing? He was running it on an SR-25. And that was kind of like the second generation of them, because you had, back in those days, Precision Reflex Industries they had their fiberglass tube, which, everybody wants for a retro build or something like the old. It was made famous on the SPR, the old Mark 12. It was a cool setup. His was the first time I ever saw it. We were all running M4s in his class, and all of a sudden, see this really neat weapon, and this was his race gun that he was using to competitively shoot, and I always thought that was really cool. When it'd be later on. I would see in the competition world, you'd see a lot of free float handguards. You had Yankee Hill came out with one back then. I think they were one of the original ones. Troy Defense had their rail, or Troy Industries rather. They had their version of it. And what was really cool was, back in the original days, you didn't have a continuous rail going across the top. But as time would go on, so like the Mark 12 SPR, we didn't have a cantilever mount, which is super common now with LPVS. We didn't have it. Like those didn't exist back then. So you were kind of limited to running one ring somewhere towards the rear of your Picatinny rail, and then one ring up top. And so on that old Mark 12 handguard, you had what was called a swan rail that went down the top, but you had one continuous rail. It's still problematic because it could move, like the rail itself could move on you, and then it's creating a little bit of torsion on the rail, and so things aren't true to spec. The other problem, though, was that back in those days, the PVS 30, PVS 22 night vision, clip-on night vision devices were coming out, and we were making use of those in front of lower powered or medium powered variable optics, and we're putting that out in the front. Well, you don't have room for all of that.
Yep.
And if I have a rail system that is not one piece, like there's no moving pieces on this rail right here. You see that the rail is machined into the handguard, right? That's kind of what you want to look for. And in recent years, the competition world has gotten away from that because everybody's doing their thumb over, doing that deal, and they don't have a need for running like a clip-on device, a thermal or night vision or something out front. But I contend that you do, and so every one of my weapons that you see, I'm running a handguard that has a continuous rail on it. Now I want to talk about free float handguard. Why do you even want to do that? So in order to wring the maximum amount of accuracy out of this weapon, anything that touches the barrel is going to affect the barrel harmonics.
Yep.
And so if I'm affecting the barrel harmonics while I'm in the process of putting rounds on target, I'm going to see some sort of deviation, like in one way or another. And this is why free flow handguards came into vogue. So you notice that I've got my sling swivel gears, Magpul RSA sling swivel. I got that on there. That also serves as a hand stop for me. So I have a point of memory there with my hand to where I can index my laser. Well, I don't have anything here that's going to affect my barrel harmonics.
No.
It's everything that's bolted onto this weapon on the retail space of this handguard is not going to affect my barrel in any way. And so that's really what you want to look for. And to the guys that are rocking, like your retro builds, or maybe you're running older handguards, something of that nature. Just know that whatever you're bolting onto the delta ring, which is right here on your weapon, whatever you're putting on there is going to cause a deviation from your point of aim, your point of impact, which is what we mate the two, and that zeroes your weapon. It's going to cause a change. Now, how much change does it cause? I don't know. I was never dissatisfied with the accuracy of the M4, so I don't know. But then again, outside of running it with a ACOG, I didn't, I wasn't too terribly worried about it. These days, I don't know. If I can get an advantage, I'm going to. And if some of the world's best shooters aren't wrong, and that's what they're doing, then that's probably what I ought to be doing too.
Yep. And that sinks right back into just enablers. I mean, that's just one of the common enablers. Second being obviously having night vision capabilities, thermal on your rifle.
Yeah. So these days, again, going back to my last statement, if I can take advantage of something, I'm going to. We talk a lot about the Second Amendment, and in conservative circles, we talk a lot about the Second Amendment. And your rights and everything, and being armed, and that's awesome. Like, we need to, and that's obviously my reason for being. Something to keep in mind is that you need all the other things too. I think that there's going to come a point in time where they're going to go after the civilian sales of night vision. Now, is that day going to be tomorrow? No. I certainly hope not. I don't anticipate it will, but could it? Certainly. Thermal. I think thermal optics. We're kind of we're in this interesting place where a lot of what's on the thermal and night vision market in the civilian space is exceeding what's in the military sector in a lot of ways. The thermal world, especially. It really blows my mind, some of the cool equipment that's out there now. So with that said, why not take advantage of all that? Have one serviceable rifle. Like, that's what you need. You need one serviceable rifle. I can't use more than one weapon at a time, right? So have one serviceable rifle and spend the rest on night vision, thermal. If you have night vision, obviously you got to have an IR laser to be able to aim. Thermal, you can, putting that on your weapon. I think a thermal clip-on is kind of everybody's point of entry into the thermal world. And I mean, you've seen all the questions. We get tons of questions about that. Well, if I'm gonna buy one thing, what is that first thing that I need to buy? And that's that. But multi-purpose items for having those, then owning the night, getting every advantage that you can get.
Absolutely. So one of the last things I want to talk about is medical. So we are a distributor of North American Rescue. All of our medical supplies come from NAR. We carry 2 or 3 different kits. Do you want to give us a rundown on the different personal kits? Because we got an MFAC, we got an active shooter pack. What are the difference between them, and what do we have for
So the MFAC and the Torque are the 2 main ones that we need to talk about. The MFAC is a first aid kit. That's one that is really meant to go on an individual person, and you got to understand something that your IFAC, MFAC, FAC, whatever you want to call it, that is for treating you as a casualty. That's not for you to whip out and treat other people. You just wrapped up TC3 up here. That is for treating you. You yourself. This is the stuff that I'm going to pull out of your kit in order to treat you. And what we're going to have with that is you've got a tourniquet, of course. You've got 4 limbs. You need to have 4 tourniquets. It's just that simple. Tourniquet is a primary intervention tool for hemorrhaging. So if you have a gunshot wound, you have major laceration, whatever it might be, of that extremity, put a tourniquet on it, shut the bleeding off. And we can have conversations about tourniquets later, but that's definitely one. That's the first option there. Kerlix gauze in there for packing the wound. That's something that I'm going to be using to pack a wound on you, using your kit, or vice versa. And really those 2 items right there to satisfy the M in March, which is massive hemorrhage, that's going to be what you're looking for. Stepping up, the Torque kit, the Tactical Officer's Response Kit. This is a more substantial kit. It's got more tools in it. And beefing things up a bit. You've got a compression bandage in there as well. This is a kit that I would strongly suggest carrying in a vehicle because this is one that I might have to use to respond to others as well. And I carry 2 of them in my vehicle just for that reason. You know, the necessity of having a quality first aid kit, and I don't mean one of those junky things that's, you know, full of, you know, Chinese knockoff cat tourniquets with, you know,
a couple Band-Aids thrown in there.
Yeah, no. And there's a lot of vendors out there that are selling that kind of crap, but no, don't, you know, you don't want to be going that route. North American Rescue, why do I deal with North American Rescue? Because North American Rescue is the one company I can think of out there that's built products that I've seen that have saved people's lives, that I've used. You know, I have used countless cat tourniquets on real world casualties. I have used countless compression bandages. You know, one incident in particular that I can recall from Afghanistan was a mass cow incident that happened with a VBAT. The huge vehicle-borne IED killed a lot of people. A lot of the Afghan border police killed, wounded. There were a lot of bodies out there. I'll just put it like that. And we responded to it with, you know, the assets that we had. And, you know, everybody kind of thinks, like, that's outside of that world. Everybody kind of thinks, well, I'm not a medic, right? I wasn't a medic. Now, I had a lot of medical training, but, and I had a lot of hands-on experience too. But everybody thinks, well, like, oh, that's not my job. Nah, it is your job. If you're the only guy out there or one of a handful of people and you're overwhelmed with casualties, it is your job to be a responder to that. You know, the necessity of carrying a first aid kit, you know, in the world that we live in where, you know, we have mass shootings, you know, we have terror incidents. I mean, I'm just going to call it out. If our government can't seem to do anything, you know, to stem the people that we know are responsible for these things, and they're not doing nothing about it, well, you know, you got to do, you have to be the responder. And that's just the unfortunate reality that we live in. So, you know, you need to be carrying this gear. I take this stuff very seriously. Obviously I take the training very seriously, or else I would be doing something else. But, you know, you have to have that gear. You never know when it's going to be pressed into service. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the parents at Uvalde didn't think that, you know, when they woke up that morning that they were going to have to be dealing with what they had to deal with, you know, and Sutherland Springs Church out in Texas, the First Baptist Church in North Charleston, you know, and the list goes on. I mean, those are the Las Vegas shootings, another one. You know, there's so many of them that I can think of to where if you have a competent medical kit and you have a modicum of training on how to use it, something just as simple as stopping massive hemorrhage. Yeah, and I know, like, that sounds really dramatic for a lot of people in their day-to-day lives, but it's a reality. That's the reality that we live in, and it can save your life, and it can definitely save the lives of others.
Absolutely. And I think too, you know, part of how we're prepared, like we talked about, almost every one of us carries a pistol on their person at any given time to, you know, in the situation, if the need arises to take someone's life or to disable somebody, why don't we have the ability to help somebody? If we have something to put holes in people, we need something to patch up holes as well, either on ourselves or on somebody else. Like you said, violence is getting more and more common and more frequent.
Because the reality is this, kind of running down some numbers. I know in the last video we did, the production team had most badass sociologists in America. I don't know about that. Made me sound like a Robert Jordan type character. But, you know, the reality is that we have a fentanyl crisis in America. We've got an opioid crisis in America. Like, this didn't just come from nowhere, right? We have a crisis of these drugs that are on our streets for a lot of you. Like, we could sit and talk about the Sackler family. We could talk about China. We could talk about Sinaloa cartel. Like, whatever, you know. All right, you could point the finger all you want, but I'm gonna tell you probably what what a lot of people that I would imagine in our audience knows, but nobody's necessarily willing to say, because we've all been touched by this in one way or another, right, over the years. And I know, like, where we live here, that's a huge deal here. Like dealing with pillheads, you know, like hillbillies and all that. People get extremely violent when they are coming off that stuff. Yeah. And one of the current medical professional guidelines, that has been for a few years now, several years, for about 6 years now, is slowly weaning people off these drugs. Well, it's altered their mental pathways, so their ability to regulate serotonin and norepinephrine in their head is all scrambled up. Their decision-making process is not as sound. And anybody that's dealt with a heroin addict or some sort of opiate addict that is fiending for their high, they're extremely violent. Yeah. And we've seen this before. You know, the late 1970s, early 1980s was the height of the contemporary heroin epidemic in the United States. If you look at the crime statistics, it followed that. You know, that was one of the most violent times in American history. We're headed for those days again. Unfortunately, I think that we're kind of getting into them now. And when you have the levels of other drugs that are present, and you're combining all of these, you know, you've got somebody who is now making some very poor life decisions, and their whole mental pathway and decision-making process is centered around you being the obstacle to get them the next high. So that's not a good place to be in. Unfortunately, people get a lot more violent when they're like that. And that's why we see some of these bizarro land kind of stories that we see coming out. Just because, you know, you couple that with potential economic strife and anything else, you're dealing with some unhinged characters out there. You know, so be ready.
You have anything you want to tell us about in closing? Anything coming up? Classes, projects?
Oh, yeah. So, you know, training needs to be in perpetuity. That should be number one for everybody out there. You need to be on top of that stuff. You know, it's all right. So you went to this one guy's class, and you need to go to somebody else's. You know, I'm not talking about me, but like for anybody. You know, you need to be out there training with anybody and everybody, gain as much knowledge as you can. Like I said in the last episode, we are blessed to live in an America where there is so many gunfighters that are out there. They're willing to share with you what they know, and that's really a thing to be commended. It's something I'm very proud of. I'm very, very proud to be a part of that community. But you need to be training with everybody. You know, other thing I'm going to say, coming up in May, I'm going to be out in Montana doing 3 courses back to back out there. We're going to have a hell of a lot of fun. Also, coming up in July, going to be out at Darcy. So shout out to Rich and Direct Action Resource Center. Going to be teaching singing out there. So look forward to seeing everybody.
Well, I think we're good to go.
You think we're good to go? It's a really wonderful show. We've got the best show, actually. We're going to talk about all the things. Guns, the lovely guns. You know, my favorite gun, honestly, my favorite gun, I'll have to say, I used to be a big fan of a 45. Because a 45 is Trump 45 and a 45, and everybody likes a 45. But now there's a Glock 47, and I really like a Glock 47.